Okay, let's just jump right in with a pretty wild thought. What if I told you that your personality, the thing you think of as the core you, isn't real? That it's basically an illusion? I know it's a bit of a mind bender, but that's exactly what we're going to dive into right now.
So, seriously, take a second. Who are you? Like, really, what is it that makes you, well, you? Do you think of it as some kind of permanent, unchanging set of traits you've always had? Or could it be something completely different? Something a lot more fluid than we think?
All right, let's kick things off with a real bombshell from neuroscientist Anil Seth. He says, and get ready for this, the self is another controlled hallucination. Whoa, a controlled hallucination? That sounds crazy, right? What in the world does that even mean? Okay, let's break that down.
So, this whole idea really boils down to a clash between two ways of thinking. On one side, you've got what we can call the Pearl view. This is probably your gut feeling, right? The idea that deep inside you there's this solid, unchanging pearl of a personality. It's your core. But then, on the other side, science is leaning more towards something called the bundle view. This says you're not a pearl at all. You're more like a constantly shifting bundle of perceptions, situations, and this is key, the stories you tell yourself.
So to really get a handle on this bundle view, we've got to look at some pretty shocking evidence. Evidence that suggests it's not your inner character, but the context you're in that drives most of what you do. And honestly, this is where that whole pearl view of a fixed self just starts to completely unravel.
And it kind of all goes back to this one single number, 0.30. That's it. It's called the personality coefficient. And when psychologist Walter Mischel published this, it sent absolute shockwaves through psychology. It's like this hard limit, a scientific mystery that just throws a wrench in everything we assume about who we are.
So what does that number even mean? Well, stick with me for a tiny bit of math. If you square 0.30, you get 0.09. That means your stable core personality traits, they only predict about 9% of your behavior. Let that sink in. 9%. The other, 91%, that's all down to the situation you're in and a bunch of other random factors. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Okay, so if the situation is so powerful, why are we all so convinced that people have fixed personalities? Well, it's because our brains have this little glitch, a cognitive bias called the fundamental attribution error. Think about it. When your coworker is late, what's your first thought? Ugh, they're so disorganized, right? You blame their character. But when you're late, oh, suddenly it's the traffic was a nightmare. You blame the situation. It's this total double standard. We see solid character traits in other people, but for ourselves, we see all the excuses and all the context.
There's a famous experiment that just illustrates this perfectly. It's called the Good Samaritan experiment. So researchers get a bunch of divinity students, people literally studying to be religious and moral leaders. They tell them they have to go give a talk on the other side of campus. Now here's the twist. They tell half of them, you're running late, you gotta hurry. And the other half, no rush, you've got plenty of time. And on their path, they planted an actor, slumped over, clearly in distress. The big question was, who stops to help?
And the results, they are just staggering. What do you think mattered most? Their deep moral character? Their religious training? Nope. The only thing that mattered was whether they were in a rush. Check this out. Of the students who weren't in a rush, 63% stopped to help. But the ones who were told they were late, only 10% stopped. A tiny, trivial, situational factor, being late, completely wiped out what we'd assume is their core good person personality.
Okay, so we've seen how powerful situations are on the outside, but what's happening on the inside? Why does our brain even bother creating this feeling of a solid self? Let's get into the neuroscience of this useful fiction that we call me.
And this brings us right back to that wild idea from Anil Seth, the controlled hallucination. What he means is that your experience of being you isn't a direct reading of reality. It's just your brain's best guess. It's constantly taking in all these noisy signals from your body, your heartbeat, your breathing, that feeling in your gut, and it has to guess what's causing them. That guess, that prediction, is what you experience as yourself. So why go through all that trouble? Why create this elaborate hallucination? Well, here's the kicker. The purpose of the self isn't for you to know yourself, it's for you to control yourself. Think of it like a user interface for your body. It's the dashboard for this incredibly complex biological machine, and its main job is just to keep everything running, to regulate your temperature, find food, and basically keep you alive. And we can actually see this happening in the brain. There's a whole network, often called the default mode network or the self network that lights up whenever you're not paying attention to the outside world. When you're just spacing out, thinking about something you did yesterday, worrying about tomorrow, or imagining what your friends think of you. That's your brain literally writing the story of me.
Cognitive scientist Bruce Hood has this brilliant analogy to explain it. Just look at the screen. You see a bright white triangle, right? It's impossible not to. But look closer. There is no triangle. There are just 3 Pac-Man shapes and some lines. Your brain is creating the triangle by filling in the blanks. And Hood's argument is that your brain does the exact same thing with your sense of self. It takes all these scattered bits, memories, feelings, sensations, and it just stitches them together into one cohesive me that isn't really there as a single object. Okay, so this might all sound a little bit bleak, like we're not real or something. But this is where it gets really, really cool. Because if your personality isn't a fixed thing and your self is just a construction, that means you can change it. This is where we learn how to rebuild our identity as a living, breathing, editable story.
Psychologist Dan McAdams has this great way of looking at it. He says our identity kind of builds up in 3 layers. When we're kids, we're the actor. We're just trying on different roles to see what fits, performing for our family and friends. Then, as teenagers, we become the agent. We start to develop our own goals, our own values, and we act with purpose. But the final, most important layer comes in adulthood. We become the author. We can look back on our lives, at the actor and the agent, and weave it all into a story that makes sense of it all. A story that explains who we are.
And how you tell that story turns out to be incredibly important. For example, people who are generally happier tend to tell their life stories using what's called a redemption sequence. That's when something bad happens, but it leads to something good. Like, yeah, I failed that test, but it taught me how to really study and be resilient. On the flip side, people who struggle with depression often use a contamination sequence, where something good gets ruined by something bad. Like, I finally got that promotion, but it cost me all my friendships. See? The events might be similar, but the story you tell about them changes everything.
McAdams really nails it with this quote. We are all storytellers of the self, narrating our lives as we live them. And that's the whole point. This simple idea is so powerful because it means you're not just a passive character getting dragged through a pre-written plot. No, you hold the pen. You are the narrator.
So that's the big idea. But how do you actually do it? If we're really the authors, how do we pick up the pen and start editing our own story? Well, let's get practical and look at a few proven tools you can use to start authoring your next chapter right now.
Okay, tool number 1 is something called self-perception theory, and it basically flips our usual thinking completely upside down. We normally think, I'm a shy person, so I don't talk at parties. This theory says it's the other way around. I don't talk at parties, therefore I must be a shy person. You figure out who you are by watching what you do. This is the actual science behind that old saying, fake it till you make it. If you want to be a more outgoing person, start acting like one. Your brain will see your new behavior and eventually update its story about who you are.
All right, next up, a really powerful technique from a field called narrative therapy. It's called externalization, and the core idea is simple but profound. The person is not the problem is the problem. Think about the language we use. We say, I am depressed, which makes it sound like depression is our entire identity. This technique teaches you to say, I am a person who is struggling with depression. See the difference? You're separating yourself from the problem. It's not you, it's something you're dealing with. And that little shift in language gives you so much more power to fight back.
And if you're thinking, but change is so hard, here's some good news. Change is actually the default setting. It's the norm, not the exception. There's tons of research on what's called the maturity principle, which shows that as we go through life, almost everyone naturally becomes more conscientious, more agreeable, and less neurotic. Our personalities aren't meant to be set in stone. They're designed to evolve as we do.
So, let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway here? It's that your personality, your sense of self, might not be real in the way we think of a rock as being real. But it is 100% necessary. It's a useful illusion. And the best part, it's an editable illusion. And that leads us to the most important point of all. The journey of life isn't about finding yourself as if you're a lost object. It's about creating yourself. It's about deciding who you want to be. So, I'll leave you with this question to think about. If you are the author of your own story, what are you going to write in the next chapter?